Samuel Jones Tilden was the 25th governor of New York and the Democratic candidate for the U.S. presidency in the disputed election of 1876, winning a popular vote majority, but ultimately being denied victory by the Electoral College. A political reformer, he was a Bourbon Democrat who worked closely with the New York City business community and led the fight against the corruption of Tammany Hall. Early life and career. Tilden was born in New Lebanon in New York. He was descended from Nathaniel Tilden, an early English settler who came to America in 1634. His father and other family members were the makers of Tilden's extract, a popular patent medicine of the 1800s and early 1900s derived from cannabis. He studied at Yale University, then studied law at New York University. He was admitted to the bar in 1841, and became a skilled corporate lawyer, with many railroads as clients in the shaky railroad boom decade of the 1850s. His legal practice, combined with shrewd investments, made him rich. Tilden's success at money management and investing caused many of Tilden's friends, relatives and political allies, including Martin Van Buren, to allow Tilden to manage the finances. From 1843 to 1844, he served as New York City's Corporation Counsel. He was a member of the New York State Assembly in 1846, and a delegate to the New York State Constitutional Convention of 1846. In 1848, largely on account of his personal attachment to Martin Van Buren, he participated in the revolt of the Barn Burners, or Free Soil faction of the New York Democrats, which nominated Van Buren for president and helped ensure the defeat of Democrat Lewis Cass and victory by Whig nominee Zachary Taylor. He was among the Barn Burners who later returned to the Democratic Party rather than joining the anti-slavery Republican Party. In 1855, Tilden was the candidate of the soft faction for New York State Attorney General. In 1859, he was an unsuccessful candidate for New York City Corporation Counsel. In the years immediately preceding the American Civil War, Tilden favored a conciliatory approach to the slaveholding states and opposed going to war. Once the war started, Tilden supported the Union, but was critical of Abraham Lincoln's strong executive approach to the presidency. After the war, Tilden again favored conciliation and opposed the radical Republican approach to Reconstruction. He was a delegate to the 1867 New York Constitutional Convention. Tilden became chairman of the Democratic State Committee after the Civil War. After initially having good relations with William M. Tweed and working closely together with him in the Democratic Party, Tilden came into conflict with the Tweed ring of New York City over issues including bribery and corruption. In 1867, Tilden received an honorary LL.D. from New York University. Tilden led the reform movement in the Democratic Party, and played a key role in the Tweed ring's demise. He was again a member of the New York State Assembly in 1872, and took a leading part in the impeachment of Judge George G. Barnard. By analyzing the bank accounts of certain members of the Tweed ring, he obtained legal proof of the principle on which the spoils had been divided. In 1874, Tilden was the successful Democratic nominee for governor, receiving 52% of the vote against incumbent Republican John Adams Dixon Prohibition Party nominee Myron H. Clark. As a reform-spirited governor in 1875 and 1876, he turned his attention to a second set of plunderers, the Canal Ring, made up of members of both parties who had been systematically robbing New York State by overcharging for maintenance and construction of the New York State Canal system. Tilden succeeded in breaking them up, and his successful service as governor gained him the presidential nomination. In 1875, he received an LL.D. from Yale University. At the same time Yale conferred the LL.D. He was also enrolled as a graduate of Yale's class of 1837 and received his Bachelor of Arts degree. Presidential election of 1876. During the 1876 presidential election, Tilden won the popular vote over his Republican opponent, Rutherford B. Hayes, proving that the Democrats were once again competitive in the American political process following the Civil War. But the result in the Electoral College was in question because the states of Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina each sent 2 sets of electoral votes to Congress. Republicans had taken over the state governments in the South during Reconstruction, but were unpopular with the overwhelmingly Democratic white Southerners, many of whom resented what they perceived as interference from the North and blamed the Republicans for the Civil War. However, Republicans were almost universally preferred by the South's newly enfranchised blacks. By 1876, white Southerners had regained control of most Southern states, but in one state with a black majority and 2 with very large black minorities, Republicans still held power. Democrats used violence and intimidation to keep blacks from the polls, while Democrats claimed that Republicans weren't simply disallowing votes tainted by violence but also legitimate returns that favored the Democratic Party. Both sides claimed victory, though the Democratic claim was tainted by violence and the Republican by fraud. As a result, one set of electoral votes from each of these 3 states had cast the ballots for the Republican Hayes, and another set had cast the ballot for the Democrat Tilden. Without these 3 states, Tilden had won 184 electoral votes but needed 185 to win the presidency. If he had taken even one state, he would have become president. However, if Hayes were to win all the contested votes, he would receive 185 electoral votes and win the election. While the Republicans boldly claimed the election, Tilden mystified and disappointed his supporters by not fighting for the prize or giving any leadership to his advocates. Instead, he devoted more than a month to the preparation of a complete history of the electoral counts over the previous century to show it was the unbroken usage of Congress, not of the President of the Senate, to count the electoral votes. Congressional leaders tried to resolve the crisis by creating a 15-member Electoral Commission that would determine which set of votes were valid. The commission consisted of 5 members from the Republican-controlled Senate and 5 from the Democratic-controlled House of Representatives. The remaining 5 members were chosen from the Supreme Court, originally 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and independent Justice David Davis. Davis, however, was elected to the U.S. Senate from Illinois, resigned from the court and turned down the commission appointment. Justice Joseph P. Bradley, a Republican, was named to replace Davis. The commission voted 8-7 along party lines to award all the votes to Hayes. The dispute, however, did not end, as some Democrats threatened to filibuster in the Senate. Eventually, enough were dissuaded from this action. Some say this was the result of a political deal, the so-called Compromise of 1877, whereby the Democrats agreed to Hayes's election and he agreed to withdraw all federal troops in the South, bringing an end to Republican Reconstruction in the South. In fact, Hayes had long before, in his letter accepting the Republican nomination, indicated his desire that the South enjoy the blessings of honest and capable local government. Upon his defeat, Tilden said, "I can retire to private life with the consciousness that I shall receive from posterity the credit of having been elected to the highest position, in the gift of the people, without any of the cares and responsibilities of the office." The Cipher Dispatches. Tilden was considered the front-runner for the Democratic presidential nomination in 1880. His chances of obtaining it suffered a blow in October 1878 at the hands of the Republican New York Tribune. The Tribune claimed to have unearthed and decoded secret cipher telegrams sent by Tilden's agents at the height of the 1876 electoral dispute, apparently offering bribes to vote counters in the contested states, $50,000 for Florida, $80,000 for South Carolina, and $5,000 for the single vote from Oregon. Tilden denied all knowledge of such dispatches, and appeared voluntarily before a congressional subcommittee in New York City to clear himself of the charge. The attempts to implicate him in corrupt transactions were not successful, and he was cleared of any personal wrongdoing. However, his political opponents endeavored to make capital out of the Cipher Dispatches in subsequent campaigns. The controversy somewhat damaged Tilden's reputation for honesty, and he did not run. In 1884, Tilden was again considered likely to become a candidate for the Democratic nomination, but his health began to fail and he declined to run. Later life. Tilden retired in the early 1880s, living as a near recluse at his 110-acre estate, Greyston, in Yonkers, New York. He died a bachelor at Greystone on August 4, 1886, at 8 a.m. He is buried at Cemetery of the Evergreens in New Lebanon, Columbia County, New York. In reference to the 1876 election, Tilden's gravestone bears the words, "I still trust in the people." Of his fortune, estimated at $7 million, $4 million was bequeathed for the establishment and maintenance of a free public library and reading room in the city of New York, but, as the will was successfully contested by relatives, only about $3 million was applied to its original purpose. In 1895, the Tilden Trust was combined with the Astor and Lenox Libraries to found the New York Public Library, whose building bears his name on its front. The Samuel J. Tilden House at 15 Gramercy Park South, which he owned from 1860 until his death, is now used by the National Arts Club. The Gov. Samuel J. Tilden Monument was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 2006. The Greyston property is now known as Untermeyer Park and was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1974. Honors. There is a Tilden Street in an area of Wichita Falls, Texas, where the streets are named for the U.S. Presidents Van Buren through Garfield. Tilden runs parallel between Grant Street and Hayes Street, as if he had won the presidency in 1876. The town of Tilden in Chippewa County, Wisconsin is named after him. There also is a Tilden Street in the city of Richmond, Virginia, as well as in the northwest quadrant of Washington, D.C. There is a Tilden Street in the Bronx, NYC, a Tilden Project, and a Tilden Avenue in Brooklyn, NYC. There is a Tilden Street in Raleigh, North Carolina, intersecting Glenwood Avenue, one of a series of parallel streets honoring U.S. presidents including Washington, Adams, Jefferson, and Cleveland. There is a Tilden Avenue in the city of Utica, New York. Samuel J. Tilden High School in Brooklyn, New York, and Tilden Elementary School in Hastings, Minnesota are named in honor of Tilden. There is a school called Tilden MS in North Bethesda, Maryland. The former United States Army installation, Fort Tilden, on the Rockaway Peninsula in New York City, is named after him. In 1887, the town of Burnett in Nebraska was renamed Tilden by the U.S. Post Office after Samuel J. Tilden. The change was made because mail from nearby Burnett kept getting mixed up with Burnett's mail. The former Dogtown, Texas is now Tilden, Texas. There is a Tilden Township in Pennsylvania named after him. 1926 A statue of Tilden stands at 112th Street and Riverside Drive in Manhattan. The Tilden Mine, an operating iron mine within the Marquette Iron Range in Marquette County, Michigan, is named after Tilden, who as a businessman played a key role in the founding of the Cliffs Iron Company in 1864. Cliffs Iron Co. later became a key predecessor in interest of the iron ore holding company Cliffs Natural Resources, a Liberty merchant ship named Samuel J. Tilden was built for World War II. It was sunk in the air raid on Bari, Italy on December 2, 1943. The popular story of the birth of the Manhattan cocktail is that it was first served at the Manhattan Club in New York City in 1874 in honor of Tilden. There is a Tilden Avenue in Brooklyn, NY. There is a Tilden Avenue in Selden, NY.